Vice Chair of Planning and Land Use Management, working as the chair today.
Okay. Item 1, Councilman, is a report from the Cultural Heritage Commission to nominate the Rhodes Avenue, the Laurel Terrace street trees as historic cultural monument. There's a typo on the agenda. One of the name of the streets should be Cantura Street rather than Catura Street.
Does that cure the matter?
Well, for noticing purposes, yes, Council.
Okay. We are prepared to move the matter. Unless there's, I have a card, but we are prepared to move the matter, and we've cured the concerns about the specificity of the trees.
And the street name.
We have a pass on our speaker. Anyone else? Do I hear a motion?
Motion to approve.
Motion to approve. Matter is approved, so will be the order. Item
2, Councilman, is a report from the Planning Commission. It's a zone change and a general plan amendment for 695 condo units in CD4.
This matter was before us last week. We're prepared to move the matter. We have cards. We have a lot of cards. I don't know if all the people speaking want to select one person. Obviously, Mr. LaPietra, you want to come up, or your representative. But as I said, we are prepared to move this matter.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, members. I want to take this time to thank the department for a great job. It's been a long 10 years. Charlie did a great job, but especially Lucy Ibarra, who is sitting right over there, needs a great big shout out. Where is she? Oh, she's right over here now. These people worked very diligently to provide the best services that this city could possibly do and put together a product that we're all going to be proud of. It will be iconic, and it will revitalize that part of Hollywood that has been neglected for the last 100 years. So I applaud everybody that's participated in this. Thank you very much, sir.
Excuse me, sir. Can you state your name for the record, please?
Eugene LaPietra.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, Lucy Ibarra is here for a staff report.
Yes.
Good afternoon. This is Lucy Ibarra with the Major Projects section of the Planning Department. We're just recommending a minor change to the language to condition Q6 relative to the parking. It was the intent of the City Planning Commission to allow the project to provide additional parking in the event that the project should do condominiums in lieu of residential apartments. To that end, the language has been modified to read as the project shall provide a minimum of 1.8 parking spaces per residential unit, and shall provide a minimum of 1 parking space per 200 square feet of commercial floor area. And that's the only change we recommend.
Mr. Chair, for the record, that change is incorporated in the revised ordinance that has been distributed to the members, and there's also a copy on file for the public to review.
Sure. Let's hear from Jonathan Brand.
Good afternoon, council members. Jonathan Brand with CD4. Council office is supportive of this minor change.
Thank you.
And the project.
Let's hear from Joel Miller.
Good afternoon, Joel Miller, applicant's representative. We would encourage you to pass along your recommendation to the full City Council. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Ferris Wiebe. Thank you. We have Mr. Doug Haynes.
Good afternoon. My name is Doug Haynes. I'm with both the East Hollywood Neighborhood Council and the Hollywood Studio District Neighborhood Council, but I'm here today on my own accord. I wasn't able to attend the prior meeting, and I'll raise a couple issues that are really concerning me and my neighbors about this project. Even though we're a mile east of this site, the EIR recognizes there'll be significant impacts that cannot be mitigated to the 101 freeway off and on ramps at Santa Monica Boulevard. Those impacts can only be mitigated if there's a huge lane change with 2 left turn lanes and a separate through lane, but the applicants only be requested to put up 12% of the cost of that. The feasibility of that actually going through is not realistic. So what I would ask for is the applicant pay the entire cost of that because his project is creating this problem. I also want to point out that there's going to be a significant job loss for the people who are currently on the site at Pennsylvania Builder Supply, which is a huge asset to this community, and they'll be gone for this project. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Jim McQuiston. How are you, Jim?
Jim McQuiston. The problem with this is, of course, the general plan forbids it and the state forbids it. And there is one other kicker. Up in Latuna Canyon, it's going to be industrial in a residential zone because they don't have the the industry space because it's being converted to residential. In other words, planning is out the window. We really have to plan and we have to abide by our plans, otherwise our city just goes kaput.
Thank you. Mr. Englander, comments? Motion?
No, I'm good. I'll go ahead and make a motion to accept with the changes that were presented by staff.
Motion moved, so be the order. Accept with the changes. Item number, I'm sorry.
Item 3, Councilman, is a general plan amendment, zone change, and height district change for a 149 guest room hotel in CD1. This item was in committee last week.
Right. We have staff report or any cards on this?
No, but I believe the department submitted the revised ordinance that incorporates the change that was submitted by your office last week.
Thank you. Good. Consent matter, Mr. Englander?
Yeah, and there's no cards on that?
No cards?
Then I'll move to accept as presented.
So be the order.
Councilman, there's a request to take item 5 next, which is an appeal for a project in CD 15 for 352 residential rental units.
Yes.
I understood we're not continuing that. We'll go ahead and move forward.
I believe there's a request for a continuance.
Yes, this agenda description for item 5 contained an error, so it must be continued to the February 24th Plum meeting in order to before it can be acted on, and the error will be corrected.
So it's just a technical issue on the posting of the agenda. Is that correct?
The agenda was description was incorrect, sir.
Got it. Okay, then I'll go ahead and move that we continue to the next item with the corrected agenda, to the next meeting.
Item 5 is continued till February 24th. Thank you.
Next item, Councilman, would be item 4, which is an appeal by the Cartwright Avenue neighbors relative to the approval of a vesting tract map for 8 single-family dwellings in CD2.
Okay, planning.
Good afternoon, council members. My name is Jim Tokunaga. I am with the initial decision maker on this case, the Deputy Advisory Agency. What you have before you is actually an appeal by aggrieved parties from the decision of the South Valley Area Planning Commission in their denial of an appeal thereby sustaining the decision of the advisory agency in approving an 8 single-family lot, small lot subdivision. The appellants in their appeal contend that the environmental clearance issued for this project, which was a mitigated negative declaration, is inadequate, and that an environmental impact report, or EIR, is necessary and based on their fair argument. The advisory agency maintains that the MND that we issued for the project is adequate, and all of the environmental impacts associated with the project have been mitigated to a level that's acceptable and within our thresholds. An EIR is only required when there are impacts that cannot be mitigated, and again, in this case, we believe that all the impacts have been mitigated. The appellants have brought up basically 5 issues in their appeal as far as the environmental impacts go. The first one had to do with aesthetics. The MND identified that there are potential impacts with aesthetics, and we required that all open space areas, driveways that are not built, must be properly landscaped and designed by a landscape architect. We also have conditions in there that require graffiti removal on buildings, fences, any kind of trash pickup on the site, and therefore we believe that these conditions in themselves address the potential aesthetics impacts. The appellants contend that these conditions are boilerplate or standard, but just because they are standard conditions, does not make them any less relevant from mitigating potential environmental impacts. Additionally, the site is not in a scenic parkway or any area controlled by regulations pertaining to design regulations. The appellants also state that there are biological resources on the site. The site is not within an endangered or threatened area for flora or fauna. There are no protected trees on site. There are 4 large date palms on the site, and as part of the conditions that the applicants are actually agreeing to save the date palms and put them in the front yard if possible. They are huge trees, so they're going to make every effort to save the trees, but there is a potential if they can't be saved that all the trees be replaced on a one-to-one basis. There are also mitigation measures on the site which have to do with the protection of migratory birds if there are any on site. The appellants also contend that there is a land use impacts. The land use designation on the property is low, medium to residential, and the zoning is RD 1.5 1VL. The number of homes proposed is 8, and that is the number that's allowed on the site by the zoning. The height limit is 45 feet, and the project as proposed is 36 feet 6 inches. The proposed small lot subdivision, however, will be the initial intrusion of this type of product onto the street. The neighborhood is, we admit, a mixed neighborhood. There's single-family R1 zoning across the street on the east side of Cartwright Avenue, or Cartwright Street. However, on the west side of the street, there's a mixture of zoning, everything from commercial, which is just 200 feet north of the site, to single-family and apartment buildings on the west side where this project is. Again, the site is RD 1.5, and there's no issues with the zoning. There is no change in zoning proposed. It's single family there is an existing single family on the site. It will be demolished. However, the proposed 8 units is permitted. There was an issue with noise. The MND requires that there be a 6-foot masonry wall to protect any parking impact noise on the adjacent single family. That is the only condition that's required for such an impact. The proposed project is a residential single-family subdivision. It is not commercial or industrial, and therefore there's no other significant noise generated by this project, and any kind of noise generated by residential has to comply with the city's noise regulations anyway. And finally, there was an issue with the traffic. The Department of Transportation requires a traffic study on a single-family subdivision if there are more than 25 units. In this case, there's only 8. Additionally, if there was more than 25 trips generated per peak hour, the DOT would also require a traffic study. In this case, with 8 single-family homes, at peak hour, the most it would generate would be 8 trips. Again, this was not an impact that cannot be mitigated without the mitigations that we proposed. Therefore, the Planning Department does recommend that the appeal be denied, and to sustain the decision of the South Valley Area Planning Commission in their denial also. Thank you.
Thank you. Can we hear from the appellant's representative?
Good afternoon. Christina Batterite, law firm of Luna and Glushon. We represent the appellants in this matter, the Cartwright Avenue Neighbors Coalition. I'd like to thank you for your time here today, and I would like to note off the bat that our clients did prevail in certain aspects at the South Valley Area Planning Commission, and we do recognize that. But the problem with the Area Planning Commission's determination is it did not address the CEQA issues in this case, and that is what's properly here before you today. I'd like to quickly address the letter submitted to you by applicant's counsel, Mr. Stephen Scheck, on February 6th. I find it interesting for a couple of reasons I'd like to point out to you. On page 3, Mr. Scheck tells you, and I quote, that the MND, which is the subject of this appeal, was prepared and processed by city staff in the same manner and to the same standards as the city does for thousands of other development projects in any given year. This is an incredible statement by Mr. Scheck, and I think one that raises a very interesting question. Does this city council know or have any idea how many thousands of these MNDs are set aside by the Los Angeles Superior Courts in any given year? I'm willing to guess no, as somebody who's been on the winning side of CEQA litigation and on the losing side of CEQA litigation, even representing real parties in CEQA litigation, defending the city, indemnifying the city. I have no clue. But what I do know is that every single one of those CEQA appeals was here before you, and you were recommended by planning staff and sometimes the city attorney, everything is fine. Like Mr. Scheck, I'm sorry if I mispronounced his last name, tells you, this is how we do it. Just because the mitigation measures are standard and boilerplate, who cares? This is how we do it. Let's roll with it. But every single one of those MNDs that was set aside by the court, like I said, was before you, and you took the recommendation of city staff, understandably so. But I think that as the body vested with the authority to hear the CEQA appeal, we would really urge you to use your independent judgment on the MND here. Another aspect of Mr. Scheck's letter I find interesting is that he attempts to belittle the fair argument standard that I hope everyone is aware of in CEQA litigation. Mr. Scheck will have you believe that any circular analysis, as long as it's completed by the city in making this MND, is adequate. Again, you can ask the 3 Superior Court judges 2 blocks away that hear CEQA litigation. That's simply not true. So on that note, I would like to reiterate the fair argument standard again for the record. California law supports the strong presumption in favor of requiring preparation of an environmental impact report whenever the record contains substantial evidence that a project may have a significant effect on the environment. The very initial study in the MND, it's on page 9 of the MND, actually says that. I quote, if the proposed project may, and may is in caps, have a significant effect on the environment, an EIR is required. It's a low threshold. The courts have said it's a low threshold. I know this council knows it's a low threshold. I think we've beat that dead horse. Here, I think the fair argument clearly exists that the project will have a significant adverse impact on aesthetics, biological resources, land use, noise, and traffic. In fact, I'd like to point out that despite what planning staff told you, the MND does not consider traffic impacts. There are no mitigation measures with regard to the traffic because, like planning staff told you, where there's not 25 or more units, they don't even consider traffic an impact. I think that's unfair. 8 single-family units in place of 1 single-family unit in a single-family residential area is certainly going to generate traffic impacts that must be analyzed. I also like to point out, and you've probably heard from your constituents and other neighbors, that aesthetics is boilerplate here. The fact that they say that a future landscaping plan is required is not adequate when the actual impacts are massing, height, and lack of open space. How does a future landscaping plan mitigate those impacts. Finally, I will not regurgitate the points in our letter, but I will point out again that we urge you to use your independent judgment in this case and find that the MND is inadequate. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chairman Cedillo, maybe I could just read into the record what constitutes substantial evidence to support a fair argument, so that when you hear people comment, you can have that in mind. Substantial evidence includes facts, reasonable assumptions predicated on facts, expert opinion supported by facts. It does not include argument, speculation, unsubstantiated opinion or narrative, or clearly inaccurate or erroneous evidence. So those are the things you have to keep in mind when you're considering whether or not there's a fair argument supported by substantial evidence of project impact.
Thank you. Got that? Can I have the applicant comment?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the council. I am Steve Scheck. I am here on behalf of the applicant. I'm his attorney. First and foremost, we are here in support of the decision of the South Valley Planning Commission. We, at that hearing, dealt with lots of issues that dealt with the project. There were additional mitigation factors and additional conditions that were placed on the project at that hearing, which my client agreed to, and we have not appealed and are moving forward on this ground. Contrary to what was just stated, the issue of the MND was addressed at that Planning Commission hearing. It was the exact 5 issues that are raised in the appellant's letter to the council were raised in their appeal to the Planning Commission. They were addressed at the public hearing, and they were addressed by the Planning Commission. As far as a few points that were raised just a moment ago, my letter to this board was not intended to belittle the fair argument standard at all. As Mr. Takanaga just referenced, we believe that the city staff, in preparing the initial study and the MND, addressed all these issues adequately, took them under submission, noted them, and then came up with a decision and determination in a manner to which they could be mitigated so the project could move forward. We do not believe that the project requires an EIR. It's an 8-unit subdivision. Granted, it isn't with an existing neighborhood, but as Mr. Takanaga pointed out, it's a neighborhood that is single-family resident as well as multifamily resident and commercial. We do not believe that it's out of character with the neighborhood, and my client has taken great efforts both in his initial design, throughout the process, as well as in response to the Planning Commission conditions that were placed on it in response to the community's objections, to address those concerns as it relates to the aesthetics, the massing of the project, etc. So again, we are here to again urge you to uphold the decision of the Planning Commission and deny the appeal. Thank you.
I have 4 speakers. You have a proposal on how much time we allot? A minute?
Are they appellants, the speakers?
Yes, they're all here to support the appeal. Minute each?
I would give appellants 2 minutes.
2 minutes per? Fine. Okay, so let's hear from the appellants. Actually, there's one supports the appeal, opposes the project. Okay. We have 3 appellants and then one opponent, so 2 minutes each per. Okay, Craig Stoll, please.
Good afternoon. My name's Craig Stahl. I live at 5132 Cartwright Avenue, directly across the street from the proposed development. I'm asking for a complete environmental impact report because I believe the CEQA issues have not been properly addressed. Number one, aesthetics and land use. The developer wants to build 8 huge, mostly 3-story units on one 12,000 square foot lot where currently exists a 1-story 1938 bungalow with 14 mature trees on the property. There's only one 2-story unit on the whole block, and that's a guest house apartment above a garage. Everything else is 1 story. The commercial building they speak of is on the other side of the alley by Magnolia Boulevard. The proposed units look like public storage buildings. Indeed, one of the APC committee members described them as army barracks. The North Hollywood Council, the neighbors, the zoning administrator, the city attorney, and the APC at the last meeting, I listened to the tape of the minutes, have all indicated their unhappiness with Planet Home's repeated unwillingness to compromise on the issues of overmassing and density. There are too many units and they're just too tall. Number 2, public services. The one narrow driveway means a fire truck cannot access the property in case of a fire. The residents in the back would be trapped. Number 3, utilities. 8 new homes with multi-bathrooms and laundry facilities for potentially dozens of additional residents will severely overburden our existing water and power infrastructure, which has not been upgraded in years, if ever. Number 4, parking and traffic. 2 guest spaces. While we appreciate that concession for 8 units is inadequate, any additional guests and residents' vehicles will be forced to park on an already overcrowded street, creating additional traffic on what is a walkway for children and parents at nearby Toluca Lake Elementary School. With the proposed MND being legally inadequate, we ask the City of Los Angeles to please protect our community by demanding a full environmental impact report. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I just want the records to reflect that 5 minutes each was given to both the applicant as well as the appellant's representatives.
So are you suggesting then that we should shorten the time for the rest of the appellants to a minute each?
I just wanted to just have the records reflect that 5 minutes was given each to the representatives. So.
Right. Terry Kaufman, Messiah City Attorney's Office, but here you have more than one appellant, so they're all on the record as appellants, so you should give them time.
Okay. Fine. Michael Benedict.
Thank you. My name is Michael Benedict, 5140 Cartwright Avenue. First, I'd like for you to reference our letter from our attorney, Mr. Glushan, which addresses each one of the concerns that Mr. Takanaga talked about. I'd like to talk about the LA CEQA threshold guidelines that I got. I'm dealing with construction noise and parking and traffic. Section I, number 1, construction noise. For a project located within an airport land or use plan, or where such a plan has not been adopted within 2 miles of a public airport or public use airport, would the project expose people residing, working in the project area to excessive noise levels. We are 2.1 miles from Bob Hope Burbank Airport, from the edge of the air to the edge of the property. 2.4 miles from the tower. We are also on the flight path, so excessive noise is definitely a concern. In-street construction impacts, temporary traffic impacts. This is section L8, third paragraph. The length of time of temporary street closures, potential safety issues involving the width of street and lane closures, temporary loss of access, the length of time of any loss of vehicular or pedestrian access to a parcel fronting the construction area, temporary loss of on-street parking. There is 28 spaces on our street from Magnolia to Otsego, 5100 block of Cartwright. The current utilization of existing on-street parking, the length of time that existing parking spaces would be unavailable. This is L8, paragraph 5, in-street construction impacts, the street segment capacity. If construction impacts on street segment operating conditions are to be evaluated. The removal of existing heavily used on-street parking spaces. And the Area Planning Commissioner Mathers at our APC hearing said the aesthetics and the potential traffic is not suitable for this neighborhood. That's a quote. Commissioner Mathers, as well as Councilman Krikorian's planning deputy, Doug Mesman, that said that further development can and may take place on the west side of Cartwright. Commissioner Mathers pointed out, this is a quote, "This could be as much as 80 homes, and if we don't address the significant impact this project has on the neighborhood, we will not be able to visit it at a later time."
Thank you.
A fair argument that this project will significantly impact...
Sir, I just want to let you know, I don't want to cut you off, but your time is up, so we got to treat everybody fairly. But if you'd like, you could submit that.
I have another
You could
sentence.
submit that if you'd like. Just want to make sure we give everybody the same fair amount of time. Thank you.
Marissa Benedict, please. If you can continue his comments.
Mr. Benedict, I can take your letter.
Before you start my time, can you just make sure you have my handout, because you haven't seen our project, I don't think. I just want to make sure that you have seen what I'm talking about. And I'm going to be only talking about the aesthetics. Yeah, that's it. My name's Marisa Benedict. I live with the guy you just stopped from talking. And done already?
Sorry.
That's okay. And I'm also speaking directly south of them, Adriana Madrigal and Mr. Guzman. They are in New York, out of town, so I'm speaking for them, and they are very affected. There's a sheet in there that shows how this project will completely ruin what they bought 4 years ago. I want to point out that, well, the reason we're here today is to argue that the adopted MND is inadequate. 3 times the neighborhood council voted this down because of the aesthetics, the height, the massing, and the character in the neighborhood. The APC saw the same problem. Jim Takanaga saw the same problem in our October 14th meeting, our November meeting, and is on tape saying that it's very intense. The massing is intense on this project. Our case, 5100 block of Cartwright Avenue, should be looked at for this case only, not as a rubber stamp out of all the other projects you're doing. This has to be looked at. At our first hearing, he actually asked the developer, maybe he could put a pitch roof on there. You're asking the developer to do something that should be required. It should match the character of our neighborhood. In section A11 of the CEQA thresholds, I'd like to read the screening criteria. Would the project introduce features that would detract from the existing valued aesthetic quality of the neighborhood, community, or localized area by conflicting with important aesthetic elements or the quality area, such as theme, style, setbacks, density, massing? This building is massive. The whole east side of that street is R1 zoning. We can't do anything. We can't even build a 4-foot fence in front of our house. We can't build a fence to block it. It will block the sun from 3 o'clock until 6:30 that we've had for the last 30 years. I'm telling you, you need to take a look at this case. We know that these appeals are always denied when we get to the CEQA part. We are asking you, as the neighborhood community of Cartwright Avenue, to please find that there's a fair argument that this is inadequate. Thank you.
Carol Citron.
Hello. My name is Carol Citroni, and I'm here in support of the appeal with the Cartwright Avenue Neighbors Coalition. I would like to say that although I don't live in the area of this project, I do live in an area where many of these types of projects are happening, and we're noticing that the city is now in the habit of approving these projects without thorough CEQA review and consideration, overlooking many significant impacts to the surrounding neighborhood. Most of these projects, especially small lot developments, as they are placing multiple houses where a single house once stood, should at the very least be required to perform an environmental impact report, since they are so divergent from the past use of the land. However, we are finding most of them manage to satisfy the planning department and plum committees with a simplified checklist of mitigations put forth in the MND. There is no city mechanism in place to follow up on these mitigations once construction begins. I think that was cited in the LA Times article a couple of weeks ago. Approval of these projects without consideration of the input from the people who actually live next door to them has resulted in a growing number of residents all over Los Angeles who are significantly and negatively impacted and who feel they are being ignored by those they have elected to represent them. Thank you very much.
Yep. Yes. I hear from the council members' staff, please.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Good afternoon. Doug Mensman speaking on behalf of Councilman Paul Krikorian. there's kind of been a group of things that have been brought up here. There's obviously the basis for the appeal that's before you right now, and then sort of what the project looks like and how it's been designed sort of as these hearings have gone on. Ms. Tokunaga and the South Valley Area Planning Commission, I think, did a very good job of taking a lot of the concerns the community voiced and incorporating them into project designs, and that being reducing the massing on upper floors, stepping back from the Cartwright side, providing a front yard setback when under the small lot actually front yard setback isn't necessarily required, retaining some of those mature trees to help create a more robust landscaping in the front to try and help soften this and make it feel more like the established housing stock that's in the neighborhood. Also incorporated into the project is some on-site guest parking, which generally is not something you will find on a project this relatively small, considering the size of some small lot projects. We have tried to give and make this project much better, much more amenable. Architecture is a matter of debate. We're working on getting a much more compatible design as far as something that's not quite as contemporary as what you see there, and something a little more traditional with some peaked gable roofs, dormer windows and things like that. But at the end of the day, this is a unique animal in that you have not only true R1 zoning on the east side of the street, not just old R1 uses, and then you have multifamily zoning on the west side. So you're going to get a split feel on Cartwright. It's not over dense. There were no exceptions really asked for. There were no variances. The map hearing was the only discretionary action truly on the property. We tried to get to a project that was going to be something that could be built in a multifamily zone, because that's what the zoning code really is supposed to function as. We tell you buy a multifamily lot, you can build a multifamily project. For the fair, the fair argument claims that have been made as part of the actual appeal, the appellant has, appellant's representative mentioned that the thresholds that we use, the numbers that we used to analyze, were inadequate. But as you've heard from City Attorney, and I will defer to her, there have to be facts presented as to why that analysis was inaccurate, and there hasn't been, from what I understand, presented any numbers as to what the real analysis should have been based on as opposed to what our analysis was based on. They claim there's talk about a lot of these being boilerplate conditions. They are standard conditions, and I don't think that necessarily imposing standard conditions, environmental mitigations, necessarily doesn't mean that this particular site was analyzed. It just means that the standard conditions we impose satisfied whatever environmental impacts were identified as this project on this location. I know for a fact that staff analyzes each individual site.
Let's hear from staff.
Because of the fact of how specific it is.
Yes.
Yes, when we review the project during the initial study, we do have a checklist based on the project as proposed. And so we go through the checklist and identify the different impacts. It is a standard initial study form that we use for the whole city, and the thresholds that we use are the same. But again, as Mr. Mensman said, each mitigated negative declaration is geared for that specific project. So while the conditions may be standard conditions, they are for that project, and just like they would be for any other type of subdivision.
So your review then tells you that you guys believe the environmental review has been adequate.
We do believe it's been inadequate. It is adequate. I don't want to make a mistake, and there has also been nothing submitted to us in the fair argument that says that there was an error or there's something greater. We haven't been given anything other than just stating at the hearings that there's a fair argument.
And so then it's your belief that the EIR is not required?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Yes.
Harry Kaufman, Mesilla City Attorney's Office. So with fair argument standard, you're not weighing who has the better argument.
Yes.
What you're looking at are those
benchmarks,
characteristics of evidence that I read to you, facts, reasonable assumptions, expert opinions, and things like that. If you find that the appellants have raised that, then you would find, based on substantial evidence, that there is a fair argument. If you feel that what was stated as argument, unsubstantiated opinion or narrative, inaccurate or speculation, then you would find that they haven't presented substantial evidence to support the fair argument.
Okay. All right. Mr. Englander.
Yeah, thank you. Mr. Chairman, what I would like to do is move forward with the commission recommendation and deny the appeal, also based on the input that we've received from both the city attorney, staff recommendation, and the council office. I think some of the arguments that were made are good arguments. I don't know that they cross that legal threshold that was described to us. In terms of the anecdotal information of how many cases may be litigated and go to a court and then not having the answers of how many of those mean, it's a very litigious society as well, and it's unfortunate that virtually every case that has either any support or opposition often ends up in litigation, period, and that's the nature of, unfortunately, CEQA as well. So I think you probably shoehorn yourself out of any argument, but I'd love to hear the numbers if you actually come up with those. But having said that, I would like to, I have a hard time believing it's in the thousands, but maybe it's probably in the thousands over the course of the last 100 years.
What's the time frame? Not in our office. I have not seen thousands.
What's the time frame? That it's certainly not in the last few years. But in any event, I'd recommend, Mr. Chair, that we go ahead and approve the commission's recommendations and deny the appeal. Although I will hand it to the appellants, they did put some really terrific graphics together. Who did the graphics? It's pretty amazing graphic work, actually, that you did. So I would give you... but I think the council office addressed a lot of what was in these graphics and countered it with what the redesign is going to be, keeping some of the mature trees, the setback of the architectural new renderings that will be coming out. And I would ask if the council office continue to work with the community on those new architectural design elements, because it seems that that was a big argument, that it adhered to the aesthetics and the character of that neighborhood as well.
So be the order. I'll state it. Okay. Next item?
Next item is the weekly report from the Director of Planning Council. So
Director is not available.
Not here. So, and public comment.
We have general public comment?
No, Mr. Chair, there is no general public comment.
Okay. All matters are addressed. This meeting is concluded. Motion to adjourn?
A motion to adjourn.